Welcome on in. This is, of course, WIP Daily. Joe Giglio with you. Appreciate everyone listening, subscribing, following the podcast here, and our YouTube page, 94 WIP. Check it out. Great video content from WIP on air, morning show, midday show, afternoon show, and, of course, all our podcasts here at WIP, putting up a ton of video on our feed. So check it out. Give us a subscription there. All right, you know what it's time for. It's time for the Mock Draft Mania. We do it once a week, and we are now less than 3 weeks away from the 2024 NFL Draft. The Eagles have the 22nd pick. They have holes on the offensive line. They have holes in the secondary. And they just traded away their best pass rusher. A lot of people believe maybe another playmaker on offense in this league is the way to go. So different ways, different mocks we've done so far. We talked about Brock Bowers on the show. We talked about a wide receiver on the show. Today, we go to CBS Sports, their latest mock draft, and a player that I just could feel already would be polarizing for one thing totally out of his control and some that are in his control. Let's get to it. All right, number one overall. This has become, for I'd say the first 5 or 6 days of mock drafts when the season ended, it was like, will Caleb Williams be the number one pick? Will the Bears trade the pick? It's been so consensus now for a month and a half. The Bears take Caleb Williams, USC number one overall. In this mock, Jaden Daniels, quarterback LSU, goes number 2. Drake May, quarterback from North Carolina, goes number 3. At number 4, a little surprise, Malik Neighbors, the wide receiver from LSU, is the first receiver off the board, not Marvin Harrison Jr. So Neighbors goes 4 to the Arizona Cardinals. The Vikings trade up. This has been pretty consensus, too, that they trade up somewhere into the top 5 or 6 or top 4 to go get a quarterback. J.J. McCarthy's their pick at number 5. Marvin Harrison Jr. goes 6 to the New York Giants. Rounding out the top 10, Joe Alt, offensive tackle from Notre Dame, goes to the Tennessee Titans. At number 8, Jared Verse, pass rusher from Florida State, goes to the Falcons. He's the first defensive player off the board. Dallas Turner, edge rusher, Alabama, number 9 to the Bears, their second 10 pick. Romeo Odunze, the wide receiver from Washington, goes to the Jets at number 10. So there are your top 10 picks in the NFL draft. And as we go through this, interesting to know where some of the other quarterbacks land. Michael Penix Jr. goes to the Raiders at number 13. I think Penix is a fascinating player. Some corners off the board, including Quinyon Mitchell to the Indianapolis Colts. Terry Arnold goes to the Broncos. So the top 2 corners off the board within the top 15 picks. Bowers in this draft lands at number 18. All right, as we get close now to the Eagles, some offensive linemen from Oregon State, Oregon go off the board, puts the Eagles on the board at number 22, and they take a player that I think is fascinating in a lot of ways. Cooper DeJean, cornerback, well, that's what he's listed as, out of Iowa. 6'1", 207 pounds. Are a couple things on Cooper DeJean that jump off the page right away that we have to discuss. Number one, he's coming off an injury, had a leg injury, surgery, did not work out at the combine. He's going to have a pro day on April 8th. But the elephant in the room, and I think I could talk about this, and not many people, maybe if it was a different scenario, I couldn't, but I can, and we could have some fun with it. He's a white corner. Now, maybe he's going to play safety, but there hasn't been a full-time white corner in the NFL since Jason Sehorn. And a lot of the discussion about this, and I think people are moving past it as they watch more of him and learn more about him, because he does seem like a really good prospect. But it is kind of jarring because you just don't see it. And it reminds me, I remember in 2017, and at that time I was still doing some part-time shows at WIP. I was writing for NJ.com, and I wrote a piece about Christian McCaffrey because I thought he would be a really good pick for the Eagles in the first round. And I thought he could kind of be this do-it-all kind of running back. And I remember some of the pushback out was he's a white running back. Like he's not going to be a star in the NFL. He's a white running back. And if you watched him at Stanford, you saw him dust everyone he played. It didn't matter. And it shouldn't matter. It's just sometimes in football, you don't see this. And obviously, on the opposite scale, 30, 40 years ago, black quarterbacks had to go through this, where people said that about them. Well, they could play quarterback. They were black. It's ridiculous. It was ridiculous, obviously. Now, I think this has become more of a comical thing than a degrading thing. It's just we don't see it very often. The best athletes, a guy like Christian McCaffrey is one of those best athletes. So put him at running back, and he's been a great player in the NFL. I don't know if Cooper DeJean is going to be that great as Christian McCaffrey at his position, but it's just you don't see it. It's been a very long time. White running backs didn't really exist much. There was a Danny Woodhead here and there, but there wasn't star backs. McCaffrey obviously has been he's a Hall of Famer when he's retired. Now Cooper DeJean comes around. It's like, wait, there hasn't been a white corner since Jason Sehorn. So people are going to have to get past that. Now, will he actually play corner in the NFL? I don't know. His versatility, I think, is a good thing. He could play safety. He could play corner. They lined him up in the box sometimes. He played special teams as a return man, scored touchdowns, returned interceptions, 4 touchdowns. In fact, I was reading a story this morning. Kirk Ferentz, the coach at Iowa, said that if he came back for 2024, obviously he's not. He's going to the draft. He'll be a first-round pick. But if he had come back for 2024, they were going to put him on offense. They were going to use him on the offensive side of the ball along with defense. He's that kind of athlete. Like, I think that's why it reminds me of the McCaffrey thing, because it's almost laughable when, someone says a white running back, and then you actually watch him. And it's like, well, he might be the most athletic guy in the field. Cooper DeJean is going to have that same conversation around him. I'm sure when you're watching NFL Network or ESPN during the draft, and he'll go off the board in the first round, maybe the Eagles at 22, they're going to put it up on the board, Jason Sehorn. And Jason Sehorn was a good player before he got hurt, but the reality is it's been 2 decades since Jason Sehorn was playing at it's actually probably even more than that, 2.5 decades. He was playing at a high level. So people are going to say, can this guy do it? Can he stick at corner? Well, I've watched him be able to run. He could play. He could tackle. He can hit. The guy he kind of reminds me of is Malcolm Jenkins when he came out of college, where he might play corner for a portion early in his career. Maybe eventually he becomes a high-level safety. Malcolm was a corner. I didn't think he was an electric corner, but he was good. But then he moved to safety and he became really good. And that might be the future for Cooper DeJean. So he has the pro day coming up on April 8th. And I just think he fits modern defense. And when it comes to the Eagles, if they do take him at 22, it's an interesting experiment, because where do you play him? Is he going to be a guy that maybe within the first half of his first season replaces a James Bradbury and he plays on the outside? Is he going to be a safety? Could he be a nickel? And how do you build a defense that has a Cooper DeJean and has a guy like Chauncey Gardner-Johnson? Because there's some similarities there between those guys. Maybe DeJean's the slot corner, and then you put Chauncey Gardner-Johnson back at safety. Last year in the draft, I really wanted this guy. He was on my big board. We talked about him before the draft. Brian Branch was a guy I loved coming out of Alabama. And one of the questions with him was he safety? He's a corner? The Lions took him, and they played him everywhere. He played a lot of safety, but he also played some nickel, and he was everywhere. He blitzed. He did a little bit of everything. And you just watch 10 minutes of any Lions game last year. He was all over the field. I made the comparison to Malcolm. I'll make the comparison to Brian Branch. I think Cooper DeJean has that kind of skill set to where I don't know what he is, and he's probably not Sauce Gardner or Patrick Surtain on the outside. I don't think that's who he is. But he can help your defense, and I think he can help in a big way. And I just think someone's going to take him and plug him in and say, we'll find a spot for him. He's one of our 11 best players on that side of the football every week because of what he could do. And then you think about, maybe what's evolving here with the return game in the NFL. Maybe there's more of an appetite for putting a guy back there that can return kicks. I know Britton Covey's done a pretty good job the last couple of years, especially last year for the Eagles, but I don't know if that's a long-term thing. Maybe Cooper DeJean is a weapon that you could use in the return game and use in the secondary. And, you go back, I was reading a story earlier about what he was able to do when he faced Marvin Harrison Jr. at Ohio State, and he lined up on him. So it's like Iowa didn't shy away from putting him on dynamic wide receivers. Now, can he do that down in the NFL on the outside? Again, I don't know. But they didn't shy away from it. They were obviously a winning program at Iowa. He is an insane athlete. Track in high school. He had more points, high school basketball player in that state than Harrison Barnes did, who's had a ridiculously long NBA career. So the guy's an athlete. And I think there's something to how he was able to do everything and how teams are looking for this almost positionless defense. So he's going to do this pro day coming up on April 8th. It's the first time he's going to run for scouts. If he runs well, I'm not even sure he's going to be on the board for the Eagles at 22. I keep seeing these mocks where he's around this area. Some the Eagles pass on him and he ends up in Green Bay or he ends up in Detroit. He's in that interesting range of the draft where he's probably not a top 15 pick, though if he runs really well, who knows? Maybe a team like the Colts takes him at 15. It's probably not a top 15 pick, but that means he's probably going to land with a good team. He's going to land with a smart team, a team that is on the precipice of being really good. Like you plug him in to the Lions, that's a big chess piece to them. The Packers, the 49ers, like teams like that, I could see landing him and plugging him right in. But in this draft, Tucker, it's Cooper DeJean, corner, safety, playmaker guy from the University of Iowa, and the first white corner in the NFL, maybe in 2 decades. What do you think?
It's funny. I usually like going to NFL.com, and Lance Zierlein does a great job with their draft profiles. He always has a comp that I always find interesting, and usually is a good starting point. Doesn't have one for Cooper DeJean. Just that space is blank. So I find that to be humorous. But the fact that he is such a versatile player, I think would be helpful for the Eagles, who, even though we aren't necessarily high on Bradbury and Slay the way they finished last season, they're still going to be here, right? Like, they're still on the team. I know people don't want to see James Bradbury. I think it cost them like $6 million more for him to play for someone else than for him to be on the Eagles. So he can be a healthy scratch, all 17 games. He's going to be a member of the team, but this is a team that does have veteran talent at cornerback. So the fact that he is capable of playing cornerback, playing safety, playing the slot, doing all sorts of those things, I think is a huge benefit for a team like the Eagles, who do have kind of incumbent starters at the moment at cornerback. And he can start at safety, or he can start in the slot and work his way outside, or he can just start on the outside if they think he's capable of doing it. I think having someone with his versatility on the back end of the defense, Vic Fangio, could be a really, really intriguing piece for this defense.
Yeah, and I think it'd be interesting to have 2 of those guys, right? Chauncey Gardner-Johnson is one. So maybe he's a slot. Maybe he's going to play safety. I don't know. And then this guy would be another. I mean, I feel like we're heading that way, Tucker, where we're going to have more secondaries, where you have 2 or 3 guys that could do 2 or 3 different things, rather than this is my strong safety, this is my free safety, this is my nickel. I just think we're heading there, and smart teams are going to get ahead of us. Brian Branch did that all year for the Lions. He was all over the place. Cooper DeJean might be that guy.
Yeah, I mean, you look at what the Lions did last year. They had Kirby Joseph, they had Brian Branch. When he was healthy, they had C.J. Gardner-Johnson. Like, they had 3 legitimately good safeties. And, we talk a lot about basketball, positionless basketball. I think we're reaching a world where at some point it's going to be positionless football, right? When you have wide receivers lining up in the backfield, you have tight ends lining up in the slot and out wide. And it's strictly about finding the best matchup and finding the biggest mismatch that favors your team, and having guys who are versatile, who can line up, in the slot, in the box, go out and play free safety or play out wide, I think would be a huge, just a huge matchup advantage for a defense that, is really trying to find itself after struggling last year.
Yeah, and then throw Sidney Brown in there. I mean, Sidney Brown last year showed a little bit of that. I saw a clip yesterday of him talking. He said he's ahead of schedule. Maybe down the line he's another one of these guys. I mean, that interception return Sidney Brown had against the Cardinals was ridiculous how fast he was. And I'm thinking about Cooper DeJean with his prowess to take the ball to the house when he gets it. I mean, the Eagles haven't had many of those guys in recent years. Chauncey Gardner-Johnson made plays a couple years ago, but his interceptions are more like he makes it and then he kind of falls down. Like, they haven't – the Eagles have not had, and most teams don't, like obviously Ed Reed back in the day did it better than anybody, but the ability to take the ball away and score on defense. Could you imagine how exciting that would be if the Eagles had a player that not only could they make an interception, but they get it and you're like, he might take it back to the house. Like, that's pretty rare.
Yeah, I mean, Asante Samuel was the last one they had that you probably felt that way. And for a team that really, really struggled just to take the ball away last year, right? Like, I think that was one of the biggest drop-offs from 2022 to 2023 is the defense just didn't make as many impact plays. Sacks were way down, turnovers were way down as well. So having someone who has ball skills, I saw something that said he has the ball skills of a receiver back there in the defensive backfield, having someone who is capable of taking the ball away, of making plays and making big plays and turning them into huge plays for your team. I just think that's something the Eagles don't really have right now. I mean, you traded away the one guy on that defense who I thought could make those game-changing plays in Hassan Reddick. And now, especially on the back end, I just don't know who you have outside of maybe Slay, who, if we're being honest, hasn't really been big play Slay since like the second half of 2021.
He hasn't. No, he hasn't. And look, Cooper DeJean is interesting. And look, if the other corners are there, if Terry and Arnold is there, if Quinyon Mitchell's there, they probably profile more as like the outside corners. But I don't know if they're going to be there. What we're heading towards, and we'll talk about it more in the next couple of weeks, Tucker, we're heading towards a weird spot in this draft. And they've been here before, and that's like this lower 20 range where the board could break their way. Like maybe someone they want really falls, or Mitchell could go, Arnold could go, the 2 or 3 favorite tackles they like, for down the line could go. And we could be looking at maybe a trade down. Maybe they have to trade up to get their guy, or they've been in this spot before. This was Andre Dillard, the area. This was Marcus Smith area. So I wonder what they think of Cooper DeJean, and he might be the most interesting player on the board at 22, depending on how the board falls.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about Brock Bowers last week and what a wild card his stock could be. You can say the same way about Cooper DeJean and what kind of happens with him over the next 3 weeks in this pre-draft process. And sitting at 22 is going to be such an interesting spot for the Eagles, because when we've done this, it feels like offense has kind of been what most teams prioritize, right? Especially ahead of them, and especially in the top 10, right? A lot of quarterbacks, a lot of wide receivers taken. So if the Eagles are thinking defense, that could push them down. There's something about sitting at 22, and I imagine the Eagles already have their draft board made up, and they have 2 to 3 guys that they expect to target at 22. And maybe Cooper DeJean is one of them, but I wonder how they feel if, someone that they maybe thought wasn't going to be there. Maybe it's a wide receiver they thought would go 12 or 13, or maybe it's Brock Bowers, and they fall to 22. Do they just take simply the best player available, regardless of position, regardless on what side of the ball he plays? Or do they stick to their board? Because there have been times in the past where guys have fallen to them, mid or to late round. I think about the Derek Barnett pick, right? And some guys who were falling down the draft. I think Jonathan Allen, right, fell down and went the pick after him. It may not be Jonathan Allen, but there was a big-time defensive tackle who fell down, and the Eagles stuck with Derek Barnett, who's kind of at the top of their board for that pick. And they seem to, they don't really seem to deviate. And maybe Nolan Smith last year was the first time where I was like, wow, they took the guy who fell through the end of the first round. Maybe they do that again, but I think it's such an interesting spot to be in, where you are at the mercy of the board and what falls in front of you.
They would be, yeah, and that's why I wouldn't be shocked if Howie moves up. If they like a guy and he's starting to fall, maybe you go get him. But Cooper DeJean is an interesting prospect, and I'll be interested to see if the Eagles have someone. I'm sure they will at his pro day coming up on Monday. Appreciate everyone listening, subscribing, following WIP Daily. We'll be back on Monday. A lot more to do, and we're a couple weeks away now from the NFL draft. More mock draft mania to come. Thanks so much for listening, subscribing, following WIP Daily.